Folks, are you tired, run down, listless? Does the fear of doing your taxes shake you to the very core? Are you having trouble cleaning in those hard-to-reach places? Well, unfortunately, this podcast can't really do anything to help out those problems, but if you're looking for an entertaining show that talks about film, then tune in to NerdtopiaCast 3000 with me, your host, Greg McIver, and my wonderful co-host,
Nikki Boom Boom.
Alright, that's enough out of you. Get on out of here. Check us out. You'll be glad you did.
Can someone go ahead and kill that, please? Just stop the track.
Nerdtopia, yo, and we got a fucking podcast. Cruising in the speeder, bullseye, and flipping wombats. Comics, video games, movies, real-life superheroes is what you can expect if you're wired to be weirdo. So we welcome all the newbies and the groupies, flashing boobies in the movies without cooties. In the show, it's got you drooling with this comedy, no fooling. Now presenting you your hosts is Steven Doolin. Word, NerdtopiaCast.com, Facebook.com/NerdtopiaCast, also YouTube and podcast 38 seconds.
Hey, what's up, guys? This is Doolin Dalton, your host of NerdtopiaCast. Wanted to take a minute to sit down and throw a disclaimer out there, if you will. I had the opportunity this week to sit down with a co-host that I've been wanting to get on this show since we started the show. I talked about it back in episode 0, so almost 6 months ago now. I've really wanted to get this guy on the show. With Steve being away on hiatus, it's kind of afforded me the opportunity to go different directions with the show and try some new things. And I was really excited about getting this particular co-host on the show. Unfortunately, we had a lot of major audio issues. We are using a program called Uvu, just as I used with Greg last week. The audio comes out a little glippy. This week, however, we had some major technical issues. So be forewarned, if you sit down to listen to the rest of this podcast, there will be audio clips. The audio is choppy, we'll say that. So if you decide to venture forward, there's some great content. Myself and my co-host sit down and we talk about Phase 2 of the Avengers, and you're going to get a lot of really great content information ahead. But if the choppy audio is going to bother you, then I recommend just go ahead, turn off the podcast, come back next week, because it has been fixed as much as I can fix it at this point. So, without further ado, guys, enjoy the latest episode of NerdtopiaCast. From an early age, he discovered that he had the uncanny power to absorb and retain the information from within the pages of comic books. A lifetime of knowledge has granted him the ability to entertain countless readers with his humorous articles about comic book superheroes, who, disguised as a mild-mannered family man and writer for NerdtopiaCast.com, now teams up with the podcast that started it all to discuss comic books, superheroes, and movies with Doolin Dalton. He's Charles Baserap, Comic Man.
Hey, what's happening, Nerdtopia? This is Doolin Dalton, and this is NerdtopiaCast. We're about to get down and nerdy, just as we do every week. As you guys know, my co-host Steve is going to be out for a while, and so, as we stated last week, we've got some revolving co-hosts. I'm really excited about this week's co-host. He's a very talented man. He's a writer. He writes for NerdtopiaCast. He writes for Forces of Geek. And he is also the author of An American at a Crossroads. So we're really excited to have him here today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Charles Baserap. How are you doing today, Charles?
I am doing fantastic. What's going on, guys?
We're doing great, and once again, man, we're excited to have you here. Charles is something of a comic book expert. If you've read his articles...
Yeah, you can say that.
Yeah. Well, I could say that because I am saying that. If you've read his articles for NerdtopiaCast, he's got the potentially Fantastic Four on there, and he has Catching Up is Hard to Do. In addition to that, you write for Forces of Geek as well, yes?
Yeah, I've got 3 weeklies on TopiaCast. I've got one monthly. I've got a TPFF Judgment Day. It's a follow-up to the potentially Fantastic Four. It goes on Fridays. And I have the monthly Chronicling Challenge. I have, 2 random pieces I do a month. At Forces of Geek, I have 3 columns on that site regularly.
Fantastic. What do you write on Forces of Geek? I mean, I know, but tell them.
For Forces of Geek, I have, all right, Danger Rooms is the first 3 Tuesdays of the month, all about X-Men comic books. X-Men's been with me. I have every issue of X-Men comic books from 1975 to this past week.
Good Lord.
So the 8,400 comic books I have, out of about 8,400 comic books I have, I'd say about 1,000 were X-Men comic books. I'm a big X-Men fan. And the 4th Tuesday I got permission to basically write whatever the hell I feel like, right? So it's a random column like that. And then I do a Smallville review, random, awesome, and WTF. I've been taking an episode from episode 1. And right now, episode 3 of season 8 just went live on Friday. So I can see the light at the end of the tunnel right now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you commit to those things, and then you get halfway through, and you start, what the fuck did I do?
Well, it's 217 episodes. It's a pain in the ass.
But you're providing content to our readers as well as the readers on Forces of Geek, and we absolutely appreciate it. Nowhere else but these kind of sites can you come here and find that kind of insider information from someone who's read the comic books for so many years. So it may seem like a thankless task at the time, but it is absolutely awesome that content is going up there daily.
Yeah, it's a blast. I mean, there's some things I've written I'm actually shocked that I've gotten about. I did a piece for NerdtopiaCast on living with bipolar disease, just a couple of weeks ago, and I'm still getting emails about that piece, and that we did as a group when the Aurora tragedy happened. We all got together, we took our funny hats off for a little bit, got serious, and it helped some people out, and that's something that people don't realize a little bit, but some books are not just a kids thing. There's a lot of seriousness to Nerdcast stuff. There's a lot of good social value to it too.
Absolutely, and I think a lot of folks that don't read comic books don't realize that. I think it's more or less classified as children's literature, and it may have been at one point in time, but I feel like it's grown from that. It's certainly evolved over the years, and you got to think that the people that were kids reading these comic books. Once upon a time, they're not kids anymore, and they still enjoy these comic books. So I feel as if the medium has evolved with the reader over the years.
Yeah, the medium's definitely evolved a bit. The double-edged sword behind that is that you have getting a lot of new readers coming in. When X-Men #1 sold, back in '91 when they relaunched it had 8 million copies sold. It's the world record setting. Nowadays, the book sells 100,000 copies. It's not the same readership anymore, and it's one of the prices to pay when you have them trying to keep the same old readers, just not getting any new readers. And that's with catching up is hard to do on Thursdays, is get read before or get people who haven't read in 10, 15 years back into it so they can pick up a comic book this week and not be lost. And that's the whole purpose, is trying to get new readers into the eye without it.
Absolutely, man. When I was a kid, I read comic books, and it was more or less. It was more difficult for me because my dad would come home and it's like, here you go, kiddo. I picked you up a copy of The Incredible Hulk. And I say, great, and I picked it up, not really realizing that it was it was more like jumping into the middle of a TV series, because they weren't. I was used to watching cartoons at that point. Like, say if I watched the Incredible Hulk cartoon, it's just very episodic, so they're very self-contained episodes, and I wasn't really familiar with that kind of continuity. So as a result, I had this box full of comic books, never really knew what was going on with them, and that's something that you kind of bring to the table with Chronologically Challenged.
Yeah, and that one I try to get things, I just basically placed in order. I mean, there's a lot of events, right? Since 1986 came around, we had Marvel had Secret Wars, and DC had Crisis on Infinite Earths, and they started doing all these things where books were crossing over into each other a lot. It used to be, you'd have an issue start in The Flash, it would continue in a Superman issue, and no big deal. Then it started becoming every single book was getting what's going on. It's like quantum physics. It's a pain in the ass. It's ridiculous. So I put that little column. I put that column together. You should not need to bring math into the situation. There's no need to do that. You should not need a degree or advanced calculus. Be like Solomon for X. I just want to read the goddamn X-Men, or I just screw it.
Well, and that brings me to some questions that I wanted to bring to the table. That I wanted to bring to you because you certainly know more about comic books than anybody I've met. I knew more than the average kid growing up, but having never really jumped into it and not having the internet like we have today for me to research and find out what the hell was going on last week or last month or however often the issues came out. You know more than the average comic book reader, I would say. So some questions I wanted to fire at you. When did you start reading comic books?
I started reading really early because, my grandfather actually learned how to read comic books, learned English from comic books, rather, when he came here from Czech Republic or wherever the hell he came from. We have no idea. Back then, all those countries were made up anyway.
He's from Uzbekistan.
Yeah, he's from Guatemala. Who the fuck knows? He comes in from out of the country. They tell him that, he goes into Ellis Island. Said his name is Vasil Bazarab. They write down Charlie Bass Rap. He's like, fuck it, I ain't get back on the boat. Charlie Bass Rap it is. That's the way we're going to roll. But, he didn't speak any English. So he winds up to Pennsylvania. He's working in the factory. He starts to read books, and they had back then a lot more verbose than they are today. It's a lot more art-oriented today. Back then, everything was like almost painfully detailed. It's like, if the guy was walking, it was like, I am standing up. I am one foot in front of the other to walk across the room. It's like that sort of thing. He got the picture across. He was all together. And he loved it so much, he wound up joining the Army because he Captain America.
Yeah,
didn't
there you
work out
go.
that way, but,
Right.
But, he learns how to read it. But, if you remember, we're around the same age. We had the Masters of the Universe movie. The TV show.
Dolph Lundgren, man.
And the all those He-Man toys came with the comic book based on the toy you were buying. So
they're not in good shape, but I still have them. Yeah.
Yeah, they were tiny little ash can size, and they were great. You'd get those. But the first time I ever remember actually seeing a comic book on it was on a bodega in the Bronx. I was with my father. He was buying cigars, and buying the Sunday paper, and I see this. It was Uncanny X-Men 210.
And the heavenly light shined down
and it had
from
a
above.
picture. Well, it had a picture of, it was Caucus, it was Mohawk Storm back when she had that badass, 80s new wave hair.
Yeah. She was all punk.
You had, she was dressed in tight leather and, this, bright white mohawk, and the cover said something like, go ahead and make our day. And I was like, wow. I was like, Dad, I need to have this now.
Yeah, right.
My dad was like, it's only a dust, screw it.
Right.
But, I didn't really know, like you said, you get a couple of issues, you don't really know. This happened to the Master storyline, so it was part one of the big storyline, and it was written back then. So, like I said, very verbose. You were able to get a lot of the characters. They explained things to you. They didn't walk through it like you were a child, but by the first 5 pages, you know who all the characters are in this book. Right. That's all I needed to know, and then from there, I didn't really have a concept of a monthly thing back then. So would I go with my father to get the paper every week? Sometimes I'd see it, sometimes I wouldn't. It wasn't until '91 when X-Men #1 came out it was the first time I'd ever bought the new #1 issue. And I was like, I need that. This needs to happen right now. So I went in there and I've been on that, and like I said, that particular series, X-Men #1, is up to issue 243 right now.
Yeah.
And I have every single issue from that.
Wow, yeah, it's been a run, man.
Yeah, and from Uncanny X-Men, I have from Giant Size X-Men #1 from 1975, which went into X-Men '94, up until, the latest, which is over 5 years to start a brand new #1 last year, but it would be up to 560 issues or so right now.
Yeah, so it all started with X-Men, and then, how much of your childhood was dedicated to reading them? I know a lot of kids, you get into sports, or you find something else, maybe you take a dance class or something. I'm not judging, but how much of your time did you spend and your parents' hard-earned money, should I say, did you spend reading those comic books?
Oh, my parents, I know what they'd say. They'd say way too goddamn much. I'll tell you that much right there. That's an answer would be. I was only getting books, and then I would kind of get, I could get the new #1 issues. And one of my friends, there was only a couple of my friends were into them a little bit, so we had a little bit of a group going, maybe 7th or 8th grade. Mm-hmm. And I started trying to draw them and write them and stuff like that. And my ideas were terrible. They were the ideas that were really good when you're 14, mm-hmm. and then you look back on them now, in your 30s. And it's like when you go out to the bar and you wake up next to that girl and you're like, man, this was a good idea last night, but what the fuck did Jose Cuervo do to me?
Oh, I used to have those same superheroes, man. And actually, I had comic books that I would draw when I was a kid. And I had no artistic ability, whatsoever. I still don't have very much now. But, and I go back and I look at those and I'm just like, man, thank God these things are buried and will never see the light of day. It's embarrassing.
Yeah. But there was one I did for an 8th grade project. It was called the Zodiac, and I know that had been used before, but everybody had a different power. Like Taurus was the bull, so he was like the really strong guy, and Gemini can turn into a twin because it was like all like it was really cheesy, crappy stuff.
It's a lot better than what
I wrote about it in one of the columns recently. Well, wait for it though. I had a guy named Demian. He was the devil figure. I wrote about him in one of my columns, recently on NCast, and his name was Demian because I wanted like a devil that had Mephisto and Damien and all that stuff. But the only reason I wanted him to be called Demian was so I could have a crossover event called the Bohemian Rhapsody. That was the only reason. If I could go back in time right now, I know people were like, you go back in time and beat the shit out of myself with a shovel for stuff like that. There's no excuses.
Well, it's really not. It's much better than what I wrote, and I won't embarrass myself. But that's hilarious, though, man. Have you ever considered, nowadays, now that you're, I would say you're an accomplished writer now. Would you ever think about going back and writing something?
I don't know if I have it in me to write, creative stuff like for a long period of time. Like I have ideas, but like writing scripts like that, I just don't think I don't know if those guys do it a month in and a month out like that. It's crazy to me.
Oh, and finally, let me ask you this one last question, and then we're gonna jump into the meat of it. You're grown now. You're no longer a teenager. You're a very career oriented man. You're a family man. You have a wife. You have a daughter. Do you ever get any grief for still reading what many classify to be children's literature?
Not personally myself. I see it a lot in the media. Like they'll treat it like you look at Big Bang Theory. I love the show. It's a lot of fun.
Very
and I credit it. Yeah, and I credit it a lot for really bringing it to the mainstream, a lot of the stuff right now. You couldn't have a show like that 10, 15 years ago. Now it's a little bit more acceptable. Things like NCast, things like Fog, and these are things that are a lot more acceptable nowadays. And it was, I don't really get it from a lot of people, but I see it like, when the media reports on something, you look at, movie reviews, and unless it's like something artsy and stuff like that, they look down on it. Not everything has to be Citizen Kane. You can have an Avengers popcorn flick and just knock it out. But with these movies right now, Spider-Man and Avengers and X-Men, all these movies.
Yeah, I agree with you. And this is why it's really cool to be a comic book fan living in the time that we're living in. Because in the past 10 years, comic books have exploded onto the big screen in a major way. And Hollywood started slowly with the big-name superheroes that everybody's heard of, like Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, the Hulk. And then when they kind of ran through those characters, they started in with some of the lesser knowns, which have made their way onto the screen. Daredevil, Elektra, Blade, and, because WB can't seem to get their shit together on the big screen.
Oh, my God.
They can't get their shit together on the big screen. But, they brought us Smallville, which was a new take on the Superman origin mythos. I think it ran a little long, but we won't go into that right now. We won't go into my gripes with Smallville because I'm not here to gripe about it. Which and you do articles for Smallville on Forces of Geek, as we mentioned earlier, and through that show we got to see Aquaman, Cyborg, Booster Gold, Blue Beetle, and Green Arrow, who is now getting his own TV series, which I've heard decent things about. So that's kind of cool. But now what we're seeing with the Avengers franchise that Marvel has introduced these characters onto the big screen, they have this billion-dollar franchise just snowballing out of control. They've created this huge world to play in. And as we talked about on previous shows, they've announced the second phase in the Avengers projects, which expands on the universe and will introduce new characters that have, up until now, been lesser known to this big budget franchise. So what I want is to have you, our comic book guru, educate us a bit, because I'm sure that there are our listeners, as we call them out there, who love the Avengers series, but they want to know who some of these characters are that have been announced to appear in these upcoming films. So, Thanos, let's start there. Because I was sitting in the movie theater and the credits rolled, and at the end of it, I just had a freaking nerdgasm because, boom, at the end of Avengers, spoilers, at the end of Avengers, boom, there's Thanos. And if you have read comic books, that if this guy's coming into Avengers 2, the Avengers are going to have to step up their game. So let's start there. Thanos, who the fuck is the ugly purple guy at the end of the Avengers? Why does he have a death fetish, and why should we be excited about him as the villain in Avengers 2?
This is the example of a guy who started out as not like a laugh-about villain. The guy used to fly around in a helicopter that said Thanos on it. I'm not joking. It was a one-person helicopter and had his side. Like it was. There's a guy who started as a kind of a joke. Jim Starlin created them. To meet Jim Starlin a few weeks ago at the Baltimore Comic-Con, and I had him sign a copy of Infinity Gauntlet #1 for me and the Return of Thanos issues. And he's a real good guy, but that. Just to, before I get into that, he's a big part of the Infinity Gauntlet storyline, which I'll get into in a second. The Titan. Titan's one of the moons of Saturn, and it turns out that in the comic books, Titan's not a moon at all, really. It's a world that's been created, and all these demigods live on it.
Okay.
Thanos is us with death. He killed his mother just to see her die, just as a tribute to death, and he just became obsessed with he's the ultimate form of nihilism, in the cosmos. And he had to try his hand getting his whole hold of the Cosmic Cube, which was a really big part of both Captain America and the Avengers movie. The Tesseract, but what it is the Cosmic Cube. It's basically a wish cube, and you can do whatever the hell you want with it. Right. And he wanted that. He lost it. But he got his hands on the Infinity Gauntlet, back in the early 90s, 6 gems that, basically gave him the powers of a god. And he killed half the universe. It was got on because it's a comic book, they all get erased, but he killed half the universe because it said, you know what, there's too many living people. Go kill half of them. He's like, all right, screw it, I'll do
it. He's population control. He's serving a purpose.
Yeah, I mean, if he was somewhat random about it. Some people he made sure were taken out of the equation. Some people he made sure survived, so you could torment them. But he walked up there.
If he were a government agent, he'd take out Honey Boo Boo.
Oh, absolutely. If he were anybody with a conscience, he'd take out Honey Boo Boo because have you seen the mother on that show?
Oh, I've seen pictures. I've seen pictures, man. I don't see anything else.
The thumb, the mother, her face. If you look at her head, because there's no neck, it's just all one piece. It's horrifying. It's a horrible thing. But yeah, Thanos, he walks up. It was one of the best scenes in comic books. He walks to the edge of this floating space shrine he's built to death, and just snaps his fingers. And the next few scenes is just Japan being wiped out by a tidal wave. Half of Earth's heroes being disappeared. It was just one of those badass scenes in comic books. But he kept getting beat up, and then sometimes he'd come back somewhat as a hero, more like on his own side, but kind of trying to learn the areas. And now he's back in the comic books. They brought him back in the comic books the week after Avengers hit theaters, just to time it perfectly. And yeah, I mean, it was the only problem was they kind of neglected that. The last time we saw him, he was dead. They haven't explained how he's back yet, but maybe they'll get there one day.
Did they ever really need to in comic books? I mean,
it's just so funny because it's like the book that's being written right now, Avengers Assemble, it's called. It's supposed to get people from the movie into the comic books, and stuff like that. And it's so fun. You're collecting the comic books. It's supposed to take place in the same world, but none of the characters are written like anywhere else in the comic books. So it's coming because they brought back him. I'm sure we're going to talk about the Guardians of the Galaxy. They brought back the Guardians of the Galaxy, and it was out of nowhere. The last time we saw these guys, they were all dead. So we're trying to figure out how the hell everybody came back. But yeah, Thanos is one of those guys you don't want to mess with. He's gone toe to toe with Thor and the Hulk, and he's not someone to mess around with. And if he gets his mind set on something like killing half the planet,
yeah, absolutely. And Avengers are going to have to step up their game, and with the additions of the new Avengers, we're going to see in the Phase 2 of the Avengers, which we're going to get into. But Thanos, I think from everything that I've read, and I could be wrong on this, as of right now, he's rumored to be the villain in the Guardians of the Galaxy film. So who are the Guardians of the Galaxy? What's their story? How do they tie in with the Avengers?
The Guardians of the Galaxy were actually originally created way back in 1969, and they're a future team. They were just in the 30-something century, And that was it. You know, their series, you know, they had a couple of little mini-series. Their main series only lasted maybe about 40 issues or so. But then back in 2008, they created this new team, and that new team is what we're going to see in the movies. So they're not only brand new to the average moviegoer, they're brand book guys because they haven't even been around 4 years yet in the comic books. They formed because they were fighting a cosmic enemy, and you know, and they needed someone to guard the galaxy, and that was basically how they came up with the name. They're like, screw it, we're guarding the galaxy. Guardians of the Galaxy. It's just...
Yeah, and the only thing I keep on seeing, you know, because once again, I'd never read Guardians of the Galaxy. I'm sure a lot of our listeners haven't read Guardians of the Galaxy. The only thing I keep on seeing pop up online is a picture of this freaking raccoon with a bazooka. What is his story?
Rocket Raccoon. He's like a tactical genius. He's like the one guy... If you're going to storm... If you're going after Normandy, this is the dude you want in your corner. He's just...
Is he more like comic relief? Or?
Yeah, he's funny, but like when you see him, like you really get down to like planning. You see like this guy, you don't want to mess with him in a fight. He's a crack sniper. You know, he knows tactics. He knows weapons. You know, he's been like a field guy ways. It's led by an Earth guy. You know, his name is Slord, and he's a superhero. And they've got guys. I don't know which lineup they're actually wind up using because they're from so many places, but they're probably going to have Drax on the team, who was actually created, by the Titans to kill Thanos. That's Drax's mission: kill Thanos. And that's so if he's probably going to make his way into the movie because they're going to need something like that. But the way I hear it is they're going to have him fight the Guardians, Thanos, in the Guardians movie, and that's going to segue directly into Avengers 2. Whether the Guardians appear in that or not, or they just get decimated at the end, and then Thanos is making his way towards Earth, that's going to be pretty badass.
Ooh, yeah, I mean, I'm sure they'll set it up. That's exciting, man. I'm certainly looking forward to it. Also, rumored, I've heard a lot about Nova, and the only thing I know about Nova was that he was in a Spider-Man comic book that I had when I was a kid. I remember reading a comic book where Spider-Man teamed up with Nova. I just looked at him like, all right, well, he's interesting. I don't know who the fuck he is, but he served his purpose, I guess, and now I guess he's coming in to Guardians of the Galaxy. Who is this guy?
No, the Nova that we had, that you read about was Richard Rider. He was a guy from Long Island. Basically, it was almost like the Green Corps. He was inducted into the Nova Corps. They're an intergalactic nuts, pretty much. And he's another one who had a big revival with the Guardians of the Galaxy. Actually, this month's Chronologically Challenged talks about Nova, talks about Guardians of the Galaxy, the Thanos Imperative, because back in like 04, 06 or whatever, Marvel said that they were going to revamp their cosmic guys. Guardians of the Galaxy, that means Thanos, that means Nova, and they wanted to get everybody, they wanted to make these big stories. So it started with Annihilation. Annihilus, one of the bad guys from the Negative Zone, who used to fight the Fantastic Four, pretty much decimated most of the, just entire galaxies. And Nova stepped up, and he was one of the people that was big in help him and Quasar and all these other cosmic guys, Silver Surfer, and then he got his own book after that, and he teamed up with the Guardians of the Galaxy during War of Kings and Realm of Kings, and we had Nova and Star-Lord from Guardians of the Galaxy actually sacrifice themselves to kill Thanos. And at last we've seen any of these guys. And then all of a sudden Avengers vs. X-Men starts up, and we see a new flying through space and to warn everybody that the Phoenix Force is coming back, and we don't know who he is. He's not Richard Rider. But we have no idea who this guy is. So from what I hear, they're bringing in next month's Marvel Now Initiative .1 issue, and it's being written by Jeff Loeb and drawn by Ed McGuinness, who teamed up before to write the Hulk and a couple other books. So it's going to be interesting to see what they're going to do with him, bringing him back into the comic books within actually the 17th. I think they could bring him back in.
Yeah, and it's funny, too, because you've got, for the long time you've had mainstream is following the page, and now it seems like it's... They're meeting somewhere in the middle now where the obscure is becoming mainstream. And I think, and once again, man, it's really, really cool to be where we are right now because these characters that have up until now, nobody's known who they are. Pretty soon everybody's going to know who they are. Which brings me to what we're looking at in Captain America 2. Actor Anthony Mackie has been cast as Sam Wilson, a.k.a. the Falcon. I had never heard of him prior to that. Who is this guy?
Falcon's huge. Falcon, for a while, Captain America's comic book was actually called Captain America and Falcon. He was originally, a bad guy. Yeah, he's got one of those complicated origins that you can tell the writers were kind of just making shit up as they went along. Because this guy back in the day would, I think they just like sit around, they're just drinking, like, it's a great idea. this guy can talk to birds, and someone else was like, yeah, that's fantastic. It's not.
He's the Aquaman of
but
the
he
air.
has some. He is pretty much, but he has some sort of like ability to communicate with some of the birds. You can see through their eyes, stuff like that. But he's got a big, he's got a red and white suit. He can fly, with man-made wings. And he was a really big part of, Captain America. 'Cause this is back, when Sam Wilson was created, there weren't a lot of black characters. There were pitifully few. But even back then, it was a big deal to have guys like the Black Panther. And especially since he was a black character, it didn't have black. It was always like Black Lightning, Black Panther, Black guy. No one else could just have, a name. Yeah, it's like they had to draw attention to. I know you're.
I'm going to take you on in a game of basketball.
Yeah,
it's like, all right, Thanos, I challenge you to a game of. I challenge you to a game of one-on-one, Thanos. You're going to save the galaxy through basketball.
It was like, let's throw every stereotype we can into this, So it's like, all right, at least he got his character in there, he was basically, Captain America's sidekick, for after Bucky died, obviously, but he was Captain America's sidekick, and he's been a big guest star in the current run of Captain America by Ed Brubaker. He's been in that for the last however many years, and he pops up never in a starring role, but to help out when Steve Rogers, the original Captain America was presumed killed, and Bucky took over the mantle. He was a big mentor to Bucky, guiding him through it, keeping him on the straight and narrow, making sure that he knew that, don't feel bad that you're taking Steve's place, he would want you to do it, that sort of thing. That's the character. I'm real excited to see him. Out of almost anybody, that they're adding as ancillary characters, he's a guy I love. He's just a badass. He can fight, he's smart, he's not, like a one pony. He's a cool guy. You're going to like seeing him on the screen.
I'm looking forward to it, man. I was actually, I was watching, Marvel Superhero Squad with my kid yesterday. We turned it on, and and I'm sure you probably watch it with your kid too. And I'm watching it, and I'm like, oh, this is the guy here. So I kind of judged based on it. I was like, this is going to be entertaining. And I guess based on everything that you've told me about him, it's fitting that they're putting him in Captain America too.
Yeah, his history is pretty much is tied so much, into Captain America. That's a big part of it. So it makes sense. It's one of those guys that you see in, outside of Bucky when he kicks for Captain America. You think Bucky automatically because he was the original, and then right away Falcon. Sam Wilson, Falcon. He's a fantastic character.
Well, and they went another direction with Bucky. They didn't have him, put on the suit and follow the Cap around. Hey, Cap, where are we going to go today? They went a different direction with it to where it was almost kind of reversed, where you had Steve Rogers kind of palling around with him in the beginning, and he was kind of the big guy and the protector. So I like the direction they went with it. So much so that I think it'll be more of a mentor-student kind of thing going on, almost like when you have say Obi-Wan and Anakin face off. I think it'll be a little bit more like that when they finally have to face off in Captain America too.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I'm most excited about is seeing that it's Winter Soldier. It's already been called Winter Soldier, and that means you know where they're going with it. And for people that don't know, in the comic books, Bucky died years ago, back in the 40s, and that was the same accident that caused Captain America to be lost in the ice. It was around that time. So it turns out though in the comic books, back in 2004, they asked Ed Brubaker. He's an independent writer for the most part. Wrote a couple of things for Batman and Catwoman and stuff like that. But they were like, hey, revamp Captain America for us. So he did. It used to be for a while the only people who stayed dead in comic books were Barry and the Flash, Uncle Ben, Spider-Man.
I was going to say that. I was going to say, but it was the rule that only the guys were that stayed dead, and Bucky was one of them, and then they brought him back, and we're like, well,
and they brought back Barry Allen. Yeah, and they brought back Barry Allen too. So Uncle Ben, sorry, buddy, you're the only one left right now. They brought him back in a way that actually, I was for a comic book resurrection, I was pleased with. A chat that when he blew up on this, trying to stop, Baron Zemo's bomb, he was frozen around them, and the Russian washed him and turned him into the Winter Soldier. And they basically just kept him in a freeze, and they'd wake him up, give him a target to assassinate. He'd shoot his guy, he'd go back to sleep, and that was the idea who he was. He had no idea what was going on. So it was one of those things that just made sense. And right in the beginning of Brubaker's run, Bucky breaks his Winter Soldier programming, and becomes, a hero again. He becomes, he keeps the name Bucky, and, he's fighting crime again. And when Steve Rogers, gets killed after Civil War, he winds up taking the role of Captain America for a while. And, for a while he kept it for actually a couple of years.
Oh, wow. Well, that's awesome, man. I'm very excited about Captain. Actually, I think out of all the new movies that are going to be released with the franchise, Captain America 2 is probably the one that I'm most excited about, just because of the way that it was written. And in a lot of ways, Captain America is kind of the flagship for Marvel. I mean, in some ways it's Spider-Man, but I think at this point, because Sony has the rights for Spider-Man, they're kind of heralding Captain America as the pardon the pun, but the flag waver for Marvel Comics. So I think out of all of them, that's the one that I'm most excited about.
Yeah, he's especially now, what they're doing with him and with what's going on in real America. With everything that's going on in the real world. So it's nice to have that constant, because Captain America, he's been patriotic, but he's also been someone who stands up for principles. Like, he knows what he's going to do. He's not going to just sit there and follow orders blindly. He's a lot more. Back in the day, he was a propaganda piece a lot of the times. It was him punching out Nazis 5 seconds. But nowadays it's
which was a nice nod in the movie.
Character. Yeah, it was fantastic. There were so many covers back in the 40s of him just beating the crap out of Hitler, which is awesome. Man, anytime you can punch out a Nazi, that's fantastic.
And what we're seeing with the Falcon and Captain America 2. And this is something that I'm still a little shaky on, because as you said earlier, they're building, and by them I mean Disney Marvel, is building this huge movie franchise. I mean, bigger than anything we've seen before until this point. I feel like the wobbliest block in this building right now is Ant-Man. And they've announced that he's getting a solo pick. I mean, do you feel as a comic book reader that Hank Pym can kind of stand on his own in a solo movie? Or do you think that maybe it'll be something where they're going to be, we'll throw Thor in there just to kind of get you to come see it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I've been kind of wary about that because Ant-Man's teased even before the Avengers came out. It was always one of those rumored pictures, back when it's like John and Bob when they're talking about why they have a Blunt Man and Chronic comic books, because they started snatching up every property they could possibly find. So that's what it sounded like at first. Hey, let's just make a movie with anybody.
Right.
But as one of the founding members of the Avengers, he's a major character. But he's never been one that I can see as a lead. He's never had his own series. And he's been Hank Pym, he's been Ant-Man, he's been the Wasp most recently. This is a guy who's, had such a complex history. I don't know if they're going to use Hank Pym, if they're going to use Scott Lang, the second Ant-Man. That'd be an interesting angle to take. But, we'll see what happens with that one. I'm wary on this one as well.
If you had to cast it, who would you see?
If he wasn't in Fantastic Four already, I guess it doesn't matter, because I wouldn't mind seeing, it was Ian Gruffudd, the guy who played Reed Richards. You can see him as a Hank Pym type role, because he's got to be slightly older, someone who has that sort of sophistication about him. And that was one of the castings they got right in Fantastic Four, I think, was him for Mr. Fantastic. He's got that, because they're very similar characters. They're both brilliant scientists, and they're both highly accomplished. So he's the type of guy I can see doing that. But you don't want someone who's too physically buffed. He's an everyman. Like Mark Ruffalo playing Bruce Banner, it works. So you can get away with almost anybody. But it's a weird character, because he talks to ants. I want it to be like Honey, I Shrunk the Kid. That's bullshit right there.
And on that note, we're going through talking about all these villains. Who is this guy? Who is this guy? And just kind of having you educate us. Thor 2, who is this villain Malekith? Because I don't even know.
That's another one. I'm really surprised. I got to give him credit for taking it that way, because he's only been around since about 1980. I think 1984 was his first appearance, give or take. He's a dark elf. If you think about if you saw the Golden Army, the second Hellboy movie,
that was the first thing that I thought when I heard
in that movie. And he's only had a handful of appearances over the years. I mean, he came out a couple of years ago. He was in an issue of the Incredible Hercules, and he had that sort of fight. But, of all the villains in Thor's stable, mythology, and whether it's even Ulik the Troll and the Enchantress and all these other guys aside from Loki, I'm really shocked they went with such a lesser known villain. But at the same time, that means that they can do whatever the hell they want with him and make him into what they want to make him into.
Well, if you have someone like, and I know he's not a Thor villain, but I know that was kind of the big gruff, like, in the Fantastic Four movies when they threw in Doctor Doom, and then they kind of did their own thing with him. Like, I remember reading, like, the rage bombs on the internet, like, how fucking dare they do this with Doctor Doom? Like, this is not Doom at all. But, and I guess that's one thing you kind of have to roll with, and that's something you have to sacrifice as a comic book fan is when you see those properties on the big screen, you have to know that the filmmaker is going to take liberties with them. You may like what they did, or you might not. So, maybe like you said, maybe this is a safer choice with going with a lesser-known supervillain.
Yeah, and that touches on, I wrote an article for Fog a couple of years back, maybe a year or so back, about how comic book fans tend to be a little bit too hard on the movie sometimes, because some things just don't translate well on the screen. I mean, you look at Galactus in the Fantastic Four movie, and they took the ultimate version of Galactus, where it was like a swarm cloud and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, and that's pretty much different comics. But if you really wanted to the old comic book, you want this 90-foot guy in a purple helmet. He looks like like a sex toy.
That's what I wanted. I wanted a giant dildo destroying New York City. That's what I wanted. Why can't I have my dildo, Charles? Give me my dildo, Charles! I just realized.
Hey, that's what you like.
I just realized I'm screaming that, and my kid is downstairs, and he's going to turn to his mom like, "What's Dylan talking about, Mom?"
And why does he want a dildo so badly?
Why does he want a dildo? What is this dildo that he speaks of?
And why does it need to be 90 feet tall? There's no need for that.
I have my reasons, kid.
Yeah,
you wouldn't understand.
They do things like that. They do things like that with the comic book. I mean, there are some things that, I'm of the mind, as long as it's with it, I'm good with it. Things like Catwoman, unforgivable. Things like Steve Shack, I mean, that was just ridiculous. That was.
Yeah, there are things, like you said, that don't translate well from the page to the screen. And I think, like, one of the first times they pointed that out was in, it was very tongue-in-cheek, in the 2000 version of X-Men, where, they're like, all right, let's suit up, and you see them suit up, and they're wearing, black tactical suits, which for that world makes the most sense. Because, I mean, like, the flashy suits, they look really, really cool in the comic books, and Wolverine is in the back seat of the Blackhawk, and he's bitching, and he's like, what are these suits that we're wearing? Which is basically the mouth of the fanboys. Every fanboy's like, what the fuck is this? And then, with a little smirk on his face, I'll never forget, Scott Summers says, what did you expect? Yellow spandex? Which kind of deflated the fanboys. Like, that's going to look retarded on the screen.
Well, especially with a team like the X-Men, where no one has the same uniform. For a while, you think of like a team, like, you don't see the Yankees going out with, like, different colored. The Fantastic Four has matching uniforms. The X-Men, the Avengers, is basically a combined.
Right, and I thought that was funny. That was something that always stuck with me. And then, and by that same respect, Hawkeye. I actually heard some people bitch about the Hawkeye costume for the Avengers, and I thought to myself, would you want him in the Hawkeye costume?
He looks like a little version of Galactus, so you might like him. I'm with your dildo fetish.
Well, maybe I would.
Like that, so. But his costume made no sense. It made no sense.
Oh, it really didn't. Other than it was colorful.
H on his head.
Yeah, and it was colorful, and it was fun in, the comic books, because when you open up the page of a comic book, you're looking into a panel of a cartoon, and it needs to be colorful.
Yeah.
But when you're translating that to the screen, not so much. So I understand some of the changes that were made, but, we went way off topic there, but that's perfectly okay. But going back to the villains... I warned you. I said we'll probably get off topic, and that's fine. But going back to the villains, finally, I know a lot of the diehard Iron Man fans have been waiting for this for a while now, and it's going to be, and we're finally getting it, Mandarin, and we're going to see him in Iron Man 3, and it's going to be none other than Sir Ben Kingsley. I couldn't think of a better person to play that role. But for those of us who don't know, who's this guy? Who is the Mandarin who is essentially Iron Man's arch villain that we're finally seeing? 2 movies, an Avengers movie, and finally this is the 4th movie where we have Iron Man coming in, and now we're finally introducing his nemesis, and I'm excited about it.
Yeah, it's great. He's one of those guys who, like, his origin changes as the years go on. He's very much a mystery. Hinting at him back in the Ven movie because that terrorist group were called the Ten Ring.
Yeah, I caught that.
And that was a funny reference. Yeah, because he finds this alien ship, and in each ring does, like, one has like a freeze beam, one has a heat beam, one makes them control minds and stuff like that. And of course, either in a comic book you find something laying around, superpowers.
All right, and I'll just touch on this real quick because Greg and I discussed it last week on the show. We've got the S.H.I.E.L.D. TV series coming out. And as an avid comic book reader, what opportunities do you think the series, something in the Whedonverse, if you will, it's going to be on the small screen, what do you think that can bring to the table, not just to expand the universe, but to give the elements that are already there more depth?
Okay, yeah, when we read the comic books, we see all about all the superheroes like Thor and Iron Man, all these special effects and, like, the grand battles. But the S.H.I.E.L.D., the guys behind the scenes, how is it for them dealing with, you were the military superpower, and now you're kind of marginalized by these big guns. So it's kind of cool to see, what they're doing, on the ground, what goes on behind the scenes, and they can add a lot by bringing in people who don't go to the movies. Maybe we get them into, get them in through watching the TV show, and then get those guys into the movies, and vice versa. There's a lot of potential.
Yeah, and I think it's a great opportunity for really lesser knowns to kind of come in and take, maybe they can introduce a Black Panther or something like that to there, because we're not going to see the big name guys, but that's perfectly okay because I'm not watching it for that. I want to see the everyman's view from that perspective. So I think it's going to be great. Looking forward to seeing the S.H.I.E.L.D. TV series.
It's even got a potential to go like the route that Firefly took and into the big screen.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we're winding down to the end of the show here. Really enjoyed having you on, but before we go, I'm going to put your writing skills to the test, or your improv skills, if you will. This is something I told you about. Now, when I was a kid, I had some random ass comic books, and some of them were, more or less promotions for whatever. I kid you not, I had a comic book for Superman and the Nestle Quick Bunny. That exists. That fucked up comic book exists. I had Archie and the Punisher. That happened.
Yes.
So,
yes, I remember that one.
Oh, God. So if these things can be done, I'm going to put you, Charles Bassraff, to the test and have you create a story. I'm just going to have you pull them out of your ass for comic book stories that don't exist and hopefully never will.
I don't know if this is something I hope never will, because I can kind of see it kind of be fun, but I want to see a Batman CSI Gotham type deal.
Ooh. Well, isn't that essentially what some of the Batman comic books are?
Yeah, but I want David Caruso to be Batman for that storyline. I want him to beat up on... Yeah, I want to see David Caruso taking up Horatio Caine as Batman, coming in, knocking down Two-Face, kicking the crap out, and just kind of looking at the camera and go, I guess two faces aren't better than one, and then just start kicking in the Who song. That's what we need to see on TV.
That's almost like I think at that point you're almost going back to the '60s Batman with. That's like an Adam West line, I guess.
Oh, that would be great.
Aren't better than one.
Oh God, okay. Adam West.
So I'm going to start. It's going to start interesting enough. I've got. First of all, you are a comic book writer. You get approached and they say, put it on the table right now. RoboCop and Green Lantern, go.
All right. Best thing about that is Green Lantern, they're space cops. You've got two different types of cops. It depends on which RoboCop we're using. If we're using one in the black fetish suit we've seen recently, or we see the original RoboCop, he was like that soulless, for a while, just a robot, just no man left in him, in the beginning of RoboCop. So just seeing how the Green Lanterns react to something like that, because the first creations of the Guardians, that the Green Lanterns were the Manhunters, and they were basically, machines that were there to take, an order into their own hands. Interested to see, how the Green Lanterns with their, emotional aspects react to, working with a machine cop again.
Superman and the X-Men.
Well, Superman fits in with that. It's one of the funny things about X-Men comics is nobody has a problem with characters like, Captain America who have superpowers, or Thor, these giant gods walking around. But these guys are born different, so they're basically hated by the public, and that was because it was during the Civil Rights Movement when it was created. It was to mimic that. But Superman had that, with Lex Luthor. I think he's an alien, and hating aliens and stuff like that, and creating all this xenophobia. So it'd be cool if both characters, had a history of being hated for being born born a certain way, uniting against a common.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. I threw that up. I threw that out there to kind of be funny, but that would actually be pretty badass. Charles Baserap, thank you so much for your time today. Absolutely love to have you on the show. You know, we've communicated over NerdtopiaCast for a long time. This is the first time we've actually sat down to have a conversation together, and it was an absolute blast, man.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for sitting in with us.
Anytime. Thanks. Appreciate it.
For NerdtopiaCast, I'm Doing Dalton.
And I'm Charles Baserap.
Filling in for Steve Wareham. Thanks for doing that with us, guys. Good night.
Find more free nerdy funny at www.nerdtopiacast.com, and be sure to check us out on iTunes and Stitcher.